Welcome back to State of the Session, our week-long series highlighting some of the big issues lawmakers will face next session. One of those is bound to be the fight over so-called school choice reform. That would allow parents to tap public money to send their children to charter, private, or religious schools. And here to talk more about what they see as the positives and negatives of such proposals, Randan Steinhauser, the Executive Director of Texans for Education Opportunity, and Monty Exter of the Association of Texas Professional Educators. Thank you to both of you for being here.
Thank you.
Well, the Lieutenant Governor, as we've all heard over the last couple of months or years, has been making this a top priority, has made this a top priority, private school vouchers. It's also gotten stuck in the House in past sessions. Randan, I want to ask you this first, and what is your group doing to maybe make this, or take a different approach this time around to try and actually get this passed?
Sure. Well, thanks for having me. I think it's important for folks to realize that Texas is now in the minority of states that does not have a private school choice program. So as we look across the country, we see tremendous momentum moving in the direction of empowering parents with more school choice. We see that all across the state as well. And so we know that not only Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, but also Governor Abbott and our two United States senators as well, both Ted Cruz and John Cornyn, have called for comprehensive school choice in Texas. So we're really excited going into the legislative session to see what kind of opportunities we may have.
Monty, I know ATPE takes a little bit of a different stance, and the argument being that it takes taxpayer dollars away from public schools, which you argue are already underfunded. And what is it? Is there, I guess, a scenario of school choice that your group could be on board with?
Well, I think that that's certainly one of many arguments, the one that you just made about funding. In addition to that, I would like to say that school choice, as the speaker pointed out the other day, is a spectrum, and ATPE isn't opposed to school choice. We're opposed to school vouchers, which is only one component way at the end of one spectrum. And I would say, as opposed to categorizing us in the minority, Texas has quite a lot of school choice on the books, and we have for decades when it comes to charter laws, when it comes to the ability of parents to move their children around within a single district, between districts. We have a lot of federal programs that work with our state programs to fund those kinds of things for parents. So I think we actually have a lot of school choice, and there are many aspects of that which we support. We simply don't support vouchers.
Let's talk about the focus this time around really being on education savings accounts, or ESAs, which award taxpayer dollars directly to parents in the form of kind of debit cards, so to speak. Randan, you argue for flexibility for parents and availability for families. What about accountability, which I think has been talked about a lot with regards to ESAs?
Sure. Well, I think we do have choice in the state of Texas if you're wealthy enough to afford private school, or if you're lucky enough to get into a charter school. However, we know that there are over 100,000 students right now who are on a charter school waitlist. So I'd like to see choice expanded to those families as well. In terms of accountability, we know that the ultimate accountability rests with the parents. And so our goal is to ensure that the parents who know their child better than anyone should have the opportunity to choose their child's educational environment. Even the best school doesn't work for every child. And so when it comes down to how these dollars are going to be accounted for, it would be accountable under the program of administered by the comptroller. It would be only used on educational expenses, things like private school tuition, curriculum, therapy, tutoring. So these educational expenses would be written into law. And if they're not accountable to the taxpayer or to the parent, then they would be held accountable, through a criminal process if there was any misuse of those funds.
We do acknowledge that parents absolutely know their children better than anyone else does. However, we can't really expect for a parent to be the expert on everything. We can't expect for the parent to be the expert on their child's health care. That's why they ask a doctor. We can't expect, likewise, for a parent to be an expert within the field of education, which is a complex field in and of itself. That's why we have educational experts out there. And to some extent, that's also why we have a state accountability system. One part of that is obviously testing, but that's only one small part of the state accountability system. And when you're talking about spending not just millions, but billions of dollars on educating students, including potentially as much as $5 billion a year on an ESA program, I think that the taxpayers deserve some measure of accountability for the money that's going into that program beyond simply one parent, one child.
I think we're lacking accountability right now in how our public schools are doing, quite frankly. When we know that there are over 900,000 students who are attending a school that has been deemed failing one of the last 3 years, the taxpayers also deserve some sort of accountability there. Certainly a parent can choose their child's doctor. Why couldn't a parent choose their child's educational setting? I think parents are very empowered to know their child better than anyone, and a classroom setting doesn't work for every child, particularly when we look at students with special needs. I think there's a lot of appetite in the legislature to see an opportunity for students who are truly our most vulnerable students to have access to customized therapy and tutoring so that they too can excel.
I think there's a lot of argument of whether or not this would be applicable or be available to all students. And we talk a lot about just how much access there would be for rural districts. Big concerns there from your standpoint in terms of how accessible this really could be for all students?
I think that there are some concerns there, and I want to actually go back for just a second on the accessibility point to the special needs students that we were talking about just a second ago, because I think it's really important for us to understand when we're talking about an ESA, particularly one that is developed after Nevada's law, which is the one that's being talked about here, that those special education parents potentially are giving up a lot in going to this program. Already, schools get more than the average amount of dollars that all students get for their special needs students. Even those dollars aren't necessarily going to translate over. In addition to that, that's only the dollars that schools get. Under federal law, the schools are required to spend whatever it takes to give them a free and appropriate education. They would have to actually sign away their IDEA rights in order to take an ESA. So I think it's very important that we look at some of those things for our special populations. And HEPE fully feels that there are things that we can do to improve education for special education students, and those are some of the things that we should be working on this session, as opposed to continually using up all the oxygen in the room over vouchers.
I don't know if you want to respond real quickly about just the rural districts and the accessibility.
Yeah, definitely. So we believe that, every student learns differently, whether you're in an urban community or a rural community, you again should have options. And so if that means that this type of program creates a marketplace for additional vendors or additional schools, we would love to see parents have those access to those opportunities. I would like to quickly just respond to one brief thing when it comes to special education students. And one of the important things about school choice in general is that it is a choice. It's an option. It's optional. So if you don't believe that this program would benefit your student, you don't have to participate.
We are just really out of time, so if you can answer this quickly, but I wanted to ask you both. President-elect Donald Trump has singled out school choice reform as a top priority. How could the Trump administration play into this debate next session?
I mean, I think that it still is true that 90+% of education law belongs to the states. The states really set the priority when it comes to education law. It certainly has been signaled that there may be some federal monies that are available, but beyond just a dollar carrot, I would expect most of the policy work to continue to be done here at the state level.
Randan, I'll give you the last word.
Less policy, more politics. I think this gives Republicans in Texas the green light to say it's time for school choice in Texas. Everyone from Donald Trump to Ted Cruz, Senator John Cornyn, our governor, lieutenant governor, they've all called for it, and I think it's time Republicans get on the boat.
Obviously, we're going to have a lot more to talk about during the session on this issue, and we'll get both of you back in to talk more about it. Thanks so much for being with us. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Up next, a look ahead to tomorrow's show, where we'll be tackling